Hello and welcome. Hello and welcome. I don't know. Wednesday's cereal time. I'm rusty. Uh, gonna talk about this month's books again. Um, I'm just gonna go through Spider-Man because there's been some interesting stuff from my perspective. Um, First up, the best Amazing Spider-Man issue I've read since the Beyond arc. And the Beyond arc was a reprieve for me because I didn't like Spencer's stuff. So I like some of the early Wells stuff, I guess. But we get Peter Parker on a date with someone, and it gets interrupted by Speedball and Rhino tussling, and he comes to them earnest as Peter Parker and diffuses the situation just by like being human. I don't know. This was a really fun issue, and it's one of those one and dones that we don't get a ton of anymore. And I really, really thought this was a standout. If you haven't been liking Spider Man, uh, you know, I think this is one that's worth maybe checking out if you're yearning for some of that. It's a really cool thing and a bit more of what I was expecting from Wells in a way before, because as a writer, especially when he's done some Spider-Man stuff before, he brings a human element and brings in the more fantastic elements and finds a way to weave the story around the meeting of those two, as opposed to just living in super heroics or trying to make a big social point. Kind of more the everyday meets the fantastic kind of an idea, which is where a lot of the strongest Marvel stuff has been historically. This man, this monster. I don't know, just I don't know. Thought there was something here, and this is what I was expecting more. And Wells came on, and we didn't get a lot of it, knowing that the timer's running this run at this point until Kelly comes in and a handful of issues. But we're there. Speaking of Joe Kelly coming on with the deaths of Spider-Man, his output recently between his Deadpool stuff and whatnot, I am trepidatious. On one hand, I think it's going to be a fierce, mediocre, like fine, Amazing Spider-Man, which is like way above where we've been for the most part for years. On the other hand, fierce, mediocre, and I'm buying it anyways. What's wrong with me? I don't know. Anyways, this was a little end cap before we get 950. This is coming back to the Tombstone Spider-Man stuff that we started off the arc with that I thought was relatively strong. I know a lot of people took issue with it. There's a lot of like power scaling or whatnot. A lot of people who are fans, particularly younger fans, took issue with. Um, I don't know how you're supposed to tell stories like that. And I mean, Tombstone is supposed to be a man made of like concrete, basically. So I don't know. Uh, I thought all the strongest elements of this run were brought to bear in this issue, with the exception of a little bit of the Paul stuff. That if they literally just did not do those pages, it wouldn't have taken away from anything else. Um, yeah, just don't. I would have. This would have been worth the $8 price tag more to me with those pages not in there. It is abysmal, and I know there's a lot of talk around the whole Paul thing. If you don't know, Paul is who Mary Jane is with now. Now that Mary Jane's a bit older, and they had kids together, but they got magicked away. Um, the problem with the ethereal fictional birth trope sort of thing coming in the weirdest way possible. Um, and now she's jackpot. There's all that. Paul has been her man in the chair, also the guy who invented her device, which gives her powers, which for someone who didn't want to be a superhero, that's a weird thing. Um, as a character, he's been kind of someone who like goes and talks to people on the sly and has had secrets and has this backstory of his father being a bad man. and now he's trying to make up for it, but he's doing some shady stuff to get there, and it doesn't work. It's not interesting on its own right. Like, I wouldn't like Paul if we were coming to him fresh on his own merits by himself. But the whole weird thing with him and MJ and Peter and all that, and that they're putting it in the Spider-Man book, is just, how do I say this? If Peter Parker isn't going to be with Mary Jane anymore, there's too much history to keep her around and not have that be a romantic element. If you want us as readers to move on, stop putting her in the book. If you want to get them back together, which is what a lot of people want anyways, just fucking do it. I mean, make a story of it, but like, let's get there. But this weird middle ground that they're trying to have, where they have the character, but it's a different circumstance, it doesn't work. It defeats the point of the character dynamic that people are looking for. And I think a lot of the writers who are used, I mean, because Spider-Man is a soap, and so you're used to drama, are used to relationship problems and whatnot. The idea that they can't make a marriage work or seem interesting, which has been noted by a number of editors and writers through the Spider offices and comics at large, DC and Marvel especially, is silly. It's a lack of creativity, and it's something that people want for this character and want to see, partially because there's not a lot of it elsewhere, and it's so ripe for it here, and it feels like it would fit. And not having that isn't helping because they're kind of gunning at it anyways. So I don't know, and that's why the Ultimate Spider-Man is doing what it's doing. So, I mean, we all know this. I guess I just find it odd. And then we get to our weird stuff. Spider Man Reign 2 is a wild book. They're bringing Miles in at this point, who wasn't really much of a thing when Reign 1 came out. This book is weird. Also, the fact that Peter has all this crazy hair as a beard and whatnot is just. This book's so stylized to a point that I think it robs the book of what it's trying to achieve with its setting and idea. And it's such a wild tonal mismatch that's still fun in a way that only comics could be. Like, even if this was animated, I would judge it so much more harshly. But as a comic, it just kind of goes. And that's, I don't know, kind of interesting. Black Suit and Blood has Dematist, I can't even say it. Number of noted creators playing back to when Spider-Man had the black suit for a handful of issues. Again, at this point, I think the number of issues reaching back to that moment in Spider-Man history is probably doubling the amount of content we have of that point in time in Spider history. It's ridiculous. I don't understand why there's such a fervor for it. I think it's because it's around the time McFarlane was going and whatnot, and comics were booming, so they think it's more popular as an idea now than it really was. Most people are reading comics now, and that's even a little before I was reading comics. Certainly reading comics regularly and picking them up off the shelf. So I don't know, but these are some okay stories. I just checked my orders. I'm locked in for the mini, all 4 issues, but it is what it is. They're fine, but they just kind of are what they are. I don't know. Then my last issues of Spider Boy. I went from thinking this was kind of a dud and Slott was spinning his wheels, especially doing the Spider Verse after having done other stuff with Spider Boy and just having done it with Spider Man again from his run where he did it initially and had done it again in that initial run over a decade. Uh, so we get to Spider and Spider Boy is starting to do some of his own stuff. His mom got her memories back, and immediately she's like mad at him and grounding him for missing school and stuff. Like, this kid's had to survive on his own for years at this point, and she's mad at him because he wasn't following a daily routine. Like, I know it's not her fault, technically, but also he was an abandoned kid without any parents, and she's mad at it. It doesn't make sense, and it rings so ingenuine, especially as a parent now, and as a parent of a kid who doesn't even have the faculties that most children do. Uh, the idea of getting mad at your kid for trying to reason the best they can with what they do and generally being a good kid but not necessarily wanting to go to school or eating healthy or brushing their teeth the way they're supposed to be, like, that's on you to instill in them. And if they found a way to survive but they weren't great at that, and their big thing was made about brushing teeth, I don't know, like the minute you get your kid back, that's what you're freaking out about. Like, understand you need to establish that, and hey, you didn't do that for years. We need to do this. This is important. I'm your parent, and I'm going to be more of a parent moving forward with any love and understanding. But just being a harsh disciplinarian coming in off of that situation feels fucking insane. Um, I, I don't know. It's been hard because I've been a big Defenders, and I liked a lot of Dan Slott's work, and even having reread some of it more recently, I think there's a lot of good stuff in what he had done prior. But the stuff he's done since he kind of jumped back onto Spider-Man is most of the worst of his work, even as someone who's enjoyed most of it. He needs to stop and figure out something new to do instead of just retreading all that. Like, it can only be worse than when he did it before. And the Spider Boy thing, he has no understanding or truth to write from. And I'm not saying comics have to be completely true, but there has to be an emotional core. There has to be something true in the story for it to resonate. That's just writing 101. It is not there at all, at any conceivable level, at a place where even a lot of comics I've kind of shriveled off, like, this isn't there, it's not written well necessarily. There's there's at least kind of some basic stuff that you'd land on, like, Crime Bad or whatever. This Spider Boy stuff is worse than a lot. Like, this isn't like I didn't like this is I don't know how this got published, kind of. And I don't want to be hyperbolic either. Like, I genuinely cannot understand who this is for at this point. I thought it was just kind of out of my wheelhouse and I was dropping it. But these last issues coming in with the horrendous. Okay, so I'm going to stop beating the dead horse and switch to what's been my favorite Spider book kind of since it came in, and that is the Spectacular Spider-Man. Um, Weirdly, this first arc wraps up at issue 7. And normally, they're very hard going for the trade issue 6. They'll probably make this a trade. I hope they don't split it into two. That would be quirky. Um, but playing with this whole mishmash that they've got going on, it's been an arc, but there's been a lot that's happened in these 7 issues. And it has been more focused on Peter than Miles, but Miles has had his moments too. I think coming out at the ending, this ended up being far more Peter centric, and I don't have a problem with that. If that's where the story went and that's how it is naturally, I kind of understand, especially, I mean, it's going to kind of default that way because there's just so much history with Peter Parker Spider-Man versus Miles, and there's a need to build for Miles, but there just is fractions to play with comparatively. And he's there, and this is helping build his star. And I think it's great that they have this book and they're doing this way, and that we're also getting a Spider-Man book that's on the ground dealing with enemies that aren't like cosmic threats and quippy and fun and has different layers. Like, this is a great book, even if it's not your favorite or whatnot. I mean, all the things you need are there in place for a decent comic book to be moving forward. I mean, it's covering the basics at least. Uh, so I don't know, as we move through and we get these weird technological threats and all the characters' minds have been messed with, it's really interesting to see everything kind of come full circle, deal with this whole Jackal situation. I bet there's going to be some fallout moving forward from the Jackal situation that's going to kind of be a through line for this series. And I'm really curious to see how long this runs, or certainly how long this runs with a creative through line that will carry forward. Because this could be a good long running book for Marvel. And also at the same time, if we have at least the main writer and a certain cabal of artists and a certain style, whatnot, especially with Ramos being on this book, it does kind of set a certain tone. And then maybe if it's a different arc, someone else, then he comes back, great. And it's, principal artist per arc. I think that's a great way to go. But if we can keep Wiseman on a book and it's like 50, 60 issues or something, I think that would be great to have something that's the B book, that's consistent, that's building these characters up more as characters than needing to be the big Marvel showcase. And yeah, I don't know. I'm talking a lot in generalities because I don't want to be spoiling the ending of the book per se, but um, dealing with Arcade and the Jackal and the Wizard, all these handfuls of issues while building up like Peter's coffee order and then Miles and Peter's relationship kind of with each other in a way that only Spider-Man with Bendis had kind of done. This is doing it now that they're both established and Miles is in a place where there's been all this back and forth at this point for years. Um, and I think everything's in a place now where this book is really cool and has a place to be the modern day Cable and Deadpool book, or kind of like what we had with Blue and Gold, Booster Gold, and Blue Beetle back in the day. Just kind of the buddy book that is there. It's not ever going to be the thing that sets the world on fire, but it's going to be a book that people read consistently. And when you read something consistently for like 3 years or something, you kind of realize that book has something going that a lot of others don't. And I'd love to see this happen for this one. So that's my Spider-Man stuff. The other thing I wanted to talk about, going back to Amazing, is there was just this ad uh, and I'm going to see if I can find it real quick. That's why I'm flipping. Um, there is this ad about Spider-Man 59. Yeah, here it is. Uh, that I made some hay about on social media, but the most brutal fights in comic history is in Amazing Spider-Man 50. No, 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 it isn't. No, it is. Who greenlit that ad? No. Look, first of all, this is mainline Marvel Amazing Spider-Man. No, it isn't. You had the guy who did Invincible, Otley, on your book. Invincible had some brutal fights, blood everywhere. They did a little bit of that in Amazing Spider-Man, and it was toned down because it had to be, because it's Marvel and Amazing Spider-Man. And I get it, and I am not complaining. And I'm not saying I'm not interested in this issue 59. I just told you guys I was interested in this whole Tombstone thing. I'm looking forward to this comic, but a little bit less so now because of this stupid ass like, I'm sorry, you're not doing heavy metal, you're not doing indie comics brutal, you're not doing berserk brutal, you're not doing, no, you're not doing the most brutal fight in comics history, the most brutal fight in Spider-Man's history, maybe doubt it, maybe. I mean, is it going to beat out Morlun? Probably not, but I'd at least be like, oh, okay, let's see how it goes. But no, it's not. And I know some of this is coming from Wells, because Wells has this fascination with like ring fights and like brutal fist fights, which is great. I think that's building up this whole Tombstone Spider-Man thing. And he's realizing, like, you put Spider-Man in a tight place with someone who's just a fucking brawler, a lot of the powers go out the window without him having to do a bunch of comic book bullshit. Like, Tombstone can beat on Spider-Man because Spider-Man can't do much if he can't move. He's fast. Yeah, how fast is he when all he can do is duck? You know, it's an obvious problem, and it's one he's repeating, but it's such a organic thing that it's not a death trap. It's not, you know, It's not some super serum. It's not a weird power gimmick. It's not dealing with Dr. Octopus's tentacles. It's just a guy who can take a hit in a tight space with a guy who can dish it out but can't necessarily take it. And most of his ability is about not taking a hit, really. That's a good way to turn the tables on the hero that they have to find a way to overcome. And I think there's a lot of clever ways in and out on that with the details of the situation as you go forward. Um, I don't know. I think there's a lot there, but when you say most brutal fight in comics, no, it isn't. So, no. Had a lot of hubbub around that. Also had some hubbub because I called Nick Spencer's run the worst run in Amazing Spider-Man history, Spider-Man history at all, which a lot of people disagree. They think Mackie or Wells right now is the worst ever, and I disagree. I think Spencer's the worst, and a lot of people are upset because they thought Spencer had so much promise. No, he didn't. Anyways, that's Spider-Man for now. I'll hit you with more soon. Peace, love, and keep reading.